our channel. Hey y'all, it's Becky here from the Beckisphere, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Becky. Duh. Sorry. and we talk about the climate here. Yeah, the problems and the solutions. So if that sounds like something you would be interested in, go ahead and click that subscribe button below. Hit the like, comment, share, all that good stuff. And today we are doing the monthly climate recap. So if you're new to the channel, every month I compile a list of climate news from the previous month, in this case April, in what I call the climate recap. I need some sort of cool logo for it. I'm thinking like a mountain with a cap. Make it for me if you want. But this recap is especially juicy because we had the whole Earth Day celebration, which featured an international conference on the subject headed by the White House. I would argue that this is probably the most important Earth Day since 2015 because of that conference, and we'll get more into what happened during this video. But first, the whole Earth Day celebration, or the Earth Day part of it, was week 3, so we have a lot to cover before that. So let's start at the beginning of April, where India started off the month reassuring the U.S. climate envoy John Kerry that New Delhi will maintain the goals promised in the 2015 Paris Climate Accord. The third largest carbon emitter promised to cut greenhouse gas emissions intensity of its gross domestic product by 33 to 35% by 2040, increase non-fossil fuel power capacity to 40% from 28% in 2015, and subsequently boost forest cover to reduce carbon dioxide. India's environmental minister said India has already achieved a 21% cut in its emissions since 2015. During the meeting, India's financial minister underscored the importance of developed countries maintaining their commitment to provide $100 billion annually to help developing countries transition sustainably. A recent study, meanwhile, analyzed weather station data found that rainstorms and drought in the U.S. West have become more erratic, with the average dry period between rainstorms growing from a month in the 1970s to a month and a half now. I wasn't on that thing, and I could have confirmed that. This has made the area more vulnerable to wildfires and water shortage. I recently did a video on water crisis, which you can check out here. I think it'll be over there. Meanwhile, the governor's office in California launched a new group called the Climate-Related Risk Disclosure Advisory Group in conjunction with the Stanford University Precourt Institute's Sustainable Finance Initiative. It studies future research and planning needs, fosters goal-driven collaboration, and delivers guidance to state partners and local communities with a focus on land use and community development, climate risk and resilience, and high-road economic development. The National Labor Relations Board found the company Amazon guilty of retaliating against 2 of its employees when they were fired after speaking out about Amazon's environmental practices and warehouse safety. Amazon disputes this finding. It's unclear if there will be any consequences because it's Amazon. Climate advocacy group 350 Canada pushed the Canadian Democratic Party and the Canadian Green Party to form an alliance for the next election. It's unclear yet if they will actually follow through with that. A study in the journal Nature Climate Change determined that global agriculture productivity is 21% lower than it would be without climate change. Study lead Cornell economist Ariel Ortiz-Bobie says it is equivalent to pressing the pause button on productivity growth back in 2013 and experiencing no improvement since then. This study was one of the first of its kind because we really need to study the impact of climate change on the agricultural system more. Other research finds that climate change is pushing many marine species poleward, which could lead to a 40% decline in tropical fish stocks by 2050. This would kill many equatorial economies that rely on fisheries. Rhode Island's Congress passed a sweeping climate change bill that requires the state to reach net zero emissions by 2050. The bill requires the Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council, which was created in 2014, to draft plans that hit that goal and empower citizens to sue the state after 2025 if the goals aren't met. The World Bank announced a new climate change action plan aimed at helping developing countries achieve measurable reductions and help mobilize the transition from fossil fuels. 35% of the World Bank Group financing will have climate co-benefits, and half of all climate financing will go towards building resilience and supporting adaptation measures. The World Bank gave $21.4 billion in climate finance last year. Meanwhile, the Bank of Montreal commits $300 billion to reach net zero emissions by 2025. NASA published a study which confirms that humans are directly causing climate change by calculating the main driving forces from 2003 to 2018. Quote, "We confirm that rising greenhouse gas concentrations account for most of the increase in radiative forcing, along with reductions in reflective aerosols. This serves as direct evidence that anthropogenic climate change has affected Earth's energy budget in the recent past." While scientists have long known the causation between human action and climate change, this is the first study that directly links humans to recent climate change. Again, all of my sources will be linked in the description box below and the top pinned comment. So, because there's a lot to cover, and I'm sure some of you would be interested in looking it up and making just your own interesting evaluations. And that was all news from just the first week of April. Week 2. President Biden proposes a budget of $14 billion to fight climate change for 2022. 10% is slated to go to underserved and marginalized communities. Google Earth released a time-lapse feature which shows what climate change will predictably do to the landscape over the next 4 decades. So check that out. Canada's Conservative Party on the second week then, possibly from the information from the first week about the Green and the Progressive Party combining, confirms that they do actually care about climate change and pledge to reach Canada's goals of reducing climate change if they are put back in charge. They're particularly in favor of climate pricing. Apple creates a $200 million fund to invest in forestry projects to remove carbon from the atmosphere. This falls in line with their promise to become carbon neutral by 2030. Facebook announced that they are officially running on 100% renewable energy, hitting this target earlier than planned. So their next goal is to hit net zero for their supply chain by 2030. The company is still receiving backlash for their poor climate denial screening, though. New Zealand becomes the first country to introduce a law that would require banks, insurers, and investment managers to report the impact that climate change has had on their business. Their Minister for Climate Change had this to say, quote, "We simply cannot get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050 unless the financial sector knows what the impact on their investments are having on the climate." The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, calculated that the current carbon dioxide levels are the highest they have been at any point over the last 3.6 million years. U.S. Trade Chief devoted her first speech to talking about the U.S.'s commitment to tackling climate change. She spoke at an event led by the Center for American Progress on April 15th, and she said, quote, "For too long, the traditional trade community has resisted the view that trade policy is a legitimate tool in helping to solve the climate crisis, as we have so often seen with labor issues. There is a clear refuge in arguing that is all a question of domestic policy, and that we need not tackle the daunting task of building international consensus around the new rules. But the dated line of thinking only perpetuates the chasm that exists between the lived experiences and expectations of real people on one hand and trade experts on the other. She particularly addressed the need to tackle illegal logging and overfishing. Two new financial reports warn of heightened climate change costs to banks during the transition due to government policies and the prioritization of clean technology. The studies also stress the importance of banks measuring climate costs and adding climate cost disclosures. US and China climate envoys meet before the Leaders' Climate Summit and leave on the same page to tackle climate change together. Still fairly symbolic, but hey, that's how this stuff starts, right? Michigan regulators create a new precedent for the state, if not the country, by formally factoring in climate change impacts into their decision-making towards a proposed pipeline. Governor Whitmer has ordered the project to shut down, but is now facing backlash from Canada, who really hates it when the U.S. shuts down their pipelines. U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey reintroduced the Green New Deal right before the Leaders' Climate Summit. The global shipping industry calls on the world leaders to issue a global carbon tax. Amazon and Global Optimism announced that over 100 companies have signed up for the climate pledge, committing to net zero carbon emissions by 2040. A German study found that climate change could increase the Indian monsoon season by at least 5% and make the season stronger and more erratic. 160 financial institutions, including Morgan Stanley, Citi, Vanguard, and Bank of America, formed a new alliance on the eve of the climate summit to reach net zero by 2050 at the latest. Their combined assets top $71 trillion. The Pennsylvania fracking industry sent a letter to their native, President Biden, calling on him to promote natural gas policies. One of Biden's first executive orders when he entered the office issued a moratorium on all new oil and gas leases on federal lands and water areas. Okay, we are finally, now to week 3, where there was the Leaders' Climate Summit. So here are some highlights of that event. So it was a 2-day virtual event hosted by the White House, which was attended by 40 world leaders, including China, India, Russia, Germany, and England. Some notable guests include Pope Francis, Greta Thunberg, Shia Bastida, Al Gore, and Bill Gates. There were 5 sessions within the events, and I'll kind of use them as sort of like titles per section to talk about what happened. So the first one is Raising Our Climate Ambition. The main goal of the summit was to call for global action addressing climate change and reassure other countries that the U.S. was in fact back on board. The U.S. formally committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions domestically by 52% below the 2005 levels by 2030. The UK announced it aims to slash its emissions by 78% by 2035 compared with 1990 levels. Dang. The conversations spur productive competition between countries to become carbon neutral first. Europe specifically wants to be the first carbon neutral continent in the world. The day before the climate summit, the 27 European countries agreed upon the European Green Deal to make Europe carbon neutral by 2050, starting by cutting EU's emissions by 55% below the 1990 levels by 2030. China did not provide any new commitments to the carbon reduction, but in 2020, China did commit to peaking carbon emissions by 2030 and hitting carbon neutrality by 2060. Australia was seen as the main country to kind of fall out of step with the rest of the leaders, maintaining its old commitment to reducing only 26 to 28% of its emissions based on 2005 levels by 2030. Australia, like the US, has a big political polarization problem around climate change. I'm kind of wondering if it has to do with the fact that the Murdoch family is also there. Japan announced that they would aim to reduce its emissions 46% by 2030 from its 2013 levels. Part 2 of the summit was investing in climate solutions. Funding climate mitigation and adaptation was a huge priority of the summit, particularly as it pertained to helping developing countries. Brazil's environmental minister asked for more money to reduce Amazon's deforestation. Brazil's new environmental plan contains 5 facets: land regularization, payments of environmental services, bioeconomics, ecological economic zoning, and increased inspection through the National Guard. Brazil commits to eliminate illegal deforestation by 2030 and to neutralize greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. President Biden stressed the importance of developed countries meeting the collective goal of mobilizing $100 billion per year in public and private finance to support developing countries. He also announced that the administration seeks to funding to double by 2024, the annual U.S. public climate finance to developing countries. Sorry, that was confusing, but you know what I mean. This would include tripling public finance for adaptation. Recently, U.S. banks committed to invest $4.16 trillion in climate solutions over just the next 10 years. Part 3, breakout sessions. So each breakout session was hosted by a U.S. leader and was filled with speeches by other countries. So the Department of Agriculture, VISLAC, and Department of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, led a session on adaptation and resilience. Then the EPA Director Reagan led sessions titled Climate at All Levels. The Defense Secretary Austin hosted a session on climate security, and I also do recommend listening to the Naval Postgraduate School's presentation by the Department of Defense Climate Lead. I'll leave a link. But that was also really good. And Interior Secretary Howland led a session on nature-based solutions. Now, at some point in the first day of the conference, because this is all still just the first day, Vice President Harris hosted a roundtable on the root cause of migration, including storm damage, drought, food scarcity, and a number of issues that related to poverty, all made worse by climate change. Mexico teased a new migration agreement between North and Central America and suggested the U.S. government could offer temporary work visas and eventually citizenship to those who would take part in a vast tree planting program he hopes will expand to Central America. Part 4, which was on the second day of the virtual summit, was Unleashing Climate Innovation. Several leading countries such as Denmark, United Arab Emirates, Israel, Kenya, Norway, and Singapore described their approaches to investing in mitigation and adaptation technologies. These include clean fuels such as hydrogen, renewables such as offshore wind and geothermal energy storage, clean desalination, carbon capturing, advanced mobility, sustainable urban design, and monitoring technologies to verify emissions and stop deforestation. Leaders from the private sector, including from GE Renewables, Vanderfall, and X, as well as from the Recentier Polytech Institute, focused on training diverse innovators for the future and investing in technologies for digitized, electrified, decarbonized, and resilient energy systems. U.S. climate envoy John Kerry closed by emphasizing the need for action beyond just the federal level. And the closing part of our 2-day virtual climate summit was talking about economics, and Biden basically stressed the need for sustainably building back the global economy from COVID. So while all this was happening in the summit, there was also things happening outside, such as California Governor Newsom announcing that the state would stop issuing hydraulic fracking permits by 2024, and Elon Musk kicking off a $100 million carbon capture technology challenge to get the ball rolling faster on that technology. Engineers and scientists can win the largest innovation incentive in history if they safely and effectively create a technology that can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it away for 100 years. New York City threw a suit at Exxon, BP, Shell, and the American Petroleum Institute for misrepresenting their products as cleaner and for advertising themselves as leaders in fighting climate change. I'll keep you posted. New Jersey releases its climate resilience strategy. Meanwhile, Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Georgia, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Texas, Utah, and West Virginia join Louisiana plaintiff in suing the Biden administration for the executive order he signed on his first day of office entitled Protecting Public Health and the Environment and Restoring Science to Tackle the Climate Crisis. And that whole executive order established the working group on the social cost of greenhouse gases. The working group would be directed to publish estimations on the social costs of carbon, nitrous oxide, and methane, and then making recommendations to the administration for how federal agencies could incorporate the social costs into their regulatory decision-making processes. Those states that I mentioned do not like this. They want to make it illegal for federal agencies to use those estimates that they collected. Most of them are also suing the administration over another executive order that was signed that same day, which placed a moratorium on new oil and gas projects on federal lands and coastal waters. In other news, a Cambridge and Edinburgh study published on Earth Day proposes new educational reforms that mix science and art to prepare kids for complex real-world challenges like climate change. The study took inspiration from Da Vinci, Ireland's education system, and the climate youth movement Teach the Future. Another study created by Blue Shield of California and Next Gen Climate found that over 80% of US youth ages 14 to 24 said they're concerned about the health of the planet. I don't remember getting that survey, and I am Blue Shield and 24. But I don't know how they do that. Now it's time to wrap things up with the climate news for the last week of April, because we still have a week left. So a new study found that glaciers are continuing to accelerate melt. Germany's High Court basically agreed with a youth movement to put more information into their plan to hit net neutrality by 2050 by providing more specific targets for 2030 and for filling out the plan further than just a decade. The U.S. Senate votes to reinstate methane emission regulations created by the Obama administration and then removed by the Trump administration. The only Republicans to vote yes were Susan Collins, Lindsey Graham, and Rob Portman. Where was Mitt Romney? I'm kind of surprised. Anyways. Food website Epicurious promises to stop posting beef recipes, citing the beef industry's climate impact. And earlier this month, in May, I actually saw that 11 Madison Park, one of the world's best restaurants, I've heard, I've not been, is going vegan. So I'm kind of sensing a trend here. Kind of cool. A Chinese Academy of Sciences study found that climate change has shifted the Earth's axis due to the melting glaciers' rapid redistribution of water around the globe. Since 1980, each pole has moved roughly 13 feet. This is the first time humans have impacted the Earth's axis, and we're running out of other things that we don't impact. Qatar plans to expand fish farming to combat declining fish stocks due to climate change killing the coral reef and also due to overfishing. Australia's main association representing pension funds investors say it will tighten its climate change policy and may recommend voting against directors of companies which are not moving fast enough to meet the Paris goals. So that's kind of cool. Saudi Arabia joins the Net Zero Producers Forum with the US, Canada, Norway, and Qatar to discuss ways to achieve net zero carbon emission targets. And the global investment management firm AllianceBernstein and Columbia University's new climate school created the corporate affiliation program to bring together scientists and innovators to tackle top climate change challenges. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, or the USDA, announced it is investing $330 million in 85 locally driven public-private partnerships to address climate change, improve the nation's water quality, combat drought, enhance soil health, protect wildlife habitat, and protect agricultural viability. And absolutely my favorite news is the MI6 head confirmed that the British intelligence has begun green spying on the world's biggest polluters to make sure they maintain their climate promises, saying, trust but verify. Next James Bond movie, anyone? I would totally watch that. The UK is hosting COP26, which will be the next big international conference to watch that's happening this year. So stay tuned for that. Don't worry, I'll cover it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the climate recap. What'd you all think? A lot happened in April. Like, goodness, my notes, I think were 6 pages, not including the sources, which were an extra 5. There was a lot that happened, and all that being said, I'm sure I still missed things. For example, if there were any environmental organizations or just other like breakout sessions that different groups had that month, please go ahead and put them in the comments below, because I'm sure there were plenty of them that I didn't even talk about. I know that there were a couple of climate protests that also happened. I think, what was it? There was the Lloyd of London had like coal put in front of their building, and also there was the manure that was put in front of the White House during the summit. Yeah, there was a lot that happened, bottom line. So if there were other things that happened that I missed, which I'm sure there were, then go ahead and leave them in the comments below, because I would love to hear all the things, and that can help me look for, or know what to look for next year, kind of thing. So that being said, thank you so much for watching. I'm going to try to do Tuesday videos better, but I am prioritizing the quality of video over when it's happening, so sorry, sort of. But that being said, you probably already noticed that the Climate Book Club session is up for today. Please check that out. As again, we are doing it, we being me and my friend environmental specialist Mickey, are doing it live on Stereo, which is a live stream podcast app where you can actually record a question or comment that you have, and then we will listen to it online and respond to you online live. So that's cool. At 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Wednesdays, and then I premiere the audio with a picture of us because we're adorable on Thursday at 6 p.m. on YouTube, which was the original time of the Climate Book Club. Still trying to figure out how I want to do the Climate Book Club, but I already know that the next one I want to do is Drawdown, because even though it's not a new book, it is mentioned many times in many of the books that we've already covered, because it's kind of the Bible of climate solutions. So I thought I would look at what the solutions were and where they are now, because that book I think was published in like 2015. So a lot of things have changed in the climate change world recently. But without further ado, next week I'm going to talk about hydrogen with the help of Mickey. And yeah, so look forward to that. I hope you all had a wonderful day, and please remember to talk about the climate every single day and to support your local news organizations, because those are the people I get my sources from. Yeah, without further ado, bye. Wait for it.